let's talk about something you probably handle every single day without even thinking about it. Aluminum. It has this wild, secret history, a really dramatic journey that takes it from the front lines of a world war right into your kitchen. I know, it sounds a little crazy, right? On one hand, you've got this massive machine of war, and on the other, this everyday, disposable thing. But believe it or not, the link between them? It's everything. It's the whole reason aluminum is, well, everywhere. So let's connect those dots.
Just look at this. It really shows you the night and day difference. Before World War II, aluminum was basically a specialty material, almost like a precious metal. And after, bam, it's in your phone, your car, the buildings you work in. It became totally woven into the fabric of modern life. So what happened? What was the one event that flipped the switch?
All right, so let's back up a bit. To really get this, we need to see what the world looked like for aluminum before everything changed. Okay, so our story kind of kicks off way back in 1886. You've got these two guys, Hall and Hérault, who working separately figure out this amazing new way to refine aluminum. And this was a huge deal. It made getting aluminum so much cheaper. It took it out of the lab and made it commercially possible. But, and this is the important part, it didn't solve everything. So even with this new, cheaper process, it was still just too expensive for the big stuff. Sure, it was lightweight, which was cool, but it couldn't go head-to-head with cheap, tough materials like steel. So it stayed in its lane as this kind of niche, specialty material. And then, a world war changed absolutely everything. This is the turning point, World War II. It wasn't just a conflict of nations. For aluminum, it was a trial by fire that would forge its entire future. I mean, this quote really hits the nail on the head. To fight a war in the air, you needed planes that were super strong, but also super light. And there was really only one game in town for that: aluminum. It wasn't just a good idea, it was a strategic imperative. And if you want to talk about scale, just get a load of this. One B-29 bomber, just one, needed 50,000 pounds of aluminum. That's insane. It was 2/3 of the entire plane. Now think about building thousands upon thousands of these things. The numbers are just staggering. Okay, so to really feel the impact, let's look at the before picture. In 1939, right on the brink of war, the US produced about 149,000 tons for the whole year. Okay, remember that number. Now watch this. 4 years. That's it. By 1943, that number wasn't 149,000 tons, it was 835,000 tons. That's more than a 5-fold jump in almost no time at all. It was an industrial miracle, really. This chart says it all, right? The line just goes vertical. The war literally built an enormous new industry from the ground up. We're talking over 50 new plants. But you can probably see where this is going. Creating a giant like that leads to a giant-sized problem when the reason for its existence disappears. So, you've built this monster of an industry for one purpose: war. But then, peace breaks out. What do you do when your number one, your only real customer, just vanishes? For the world, it was peace. But for the aluminum industry, it was the start of a whole new war, a war for its own survival. You've got all these factories ready to pump out metal, and suddenly, crickets. No orders. It was a full-blown crisis. The official term for this is overcapacity, and it's a huge problem. Think of it like this. You build a pizza place big enough to feed an entire army, and then the army leaves town. That's exactly what happened. They were geared up to build bombers, but now people just wanted, regular stuff. So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How on earth do you save this massive industry when its whole purpose just evaporated? Where do you even start looking for new customers for all that metal? Well, the answer was pretty genius and incredibly aggressive. They decided, if the market doesn't exist, we'll just have to build it ourselves. They shifted their focus from the battlefield to your home. It was basically a 3-part plan. First, find new civilian uses. Second, go to war, a marketing war against the old-school materials like steel and glass. And third, just innovate like crazy. They had to invent the future, and fast. And this, right here, is where our modern world starts to look familiar. That soda can you're holding? Yep, came from this. Those cool glass and metal skyscrapers? Aluminum made them possible. Cars getting lighter and more efficient? You guessed it. They didn't just find a place in the market, they bulldozed their way in and remade it in their own image. So when you put it all together, the legacy of this whole saga, from war to crisis to a commercial takeover, is literally the world we live in today. You can see the whole journey right here.
It starts with a discovery, gets supercharged by a war, faces near death in the aftermath, and then comes roaring back to conquer the consumer world. It's more than just a story about aluminum, it's a perfect example of how massive pressure can lead to incredible innovation.
You know, for the entire first half of the 20th century, there was one company that had an absolutely unbreakable grip on a metal that would pretty much define the modern world: aluminum. This is the incredible story of the Alcoa Monopoly, a corporate empire so powerful, the US government didn't just sue it, it had to literally build its competition from the ground up. So just how total was this control? Well, at its peak, Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, commanded a staggering 90% share of the virgin aluminum market in the United States. Think about that. It wasn't just a big company. For all practical purposes, Alcoa was the aluminum market. And let's be super clear about what a monopoly really is. It's not just about being big, it's about having the exclusive, unchecked power to control the entire supply and therefore set the prices. It means there's no real competition to speak of. And that's exactly the kind of power Alcoa had for decades. So how on earth did Alcoa manage to build what so many people thought was an absolutely unbreakable fortress? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was basically a 50-year masterclass in corporate strategy. It all started with the foundation, key patents on the essential refining process. But they didn't stop there. Over the next 20 years, they built a completely self-contained supply chain. And when I say everything, I mean everything. From the mines digging up the raw bauxite, to the refineries, all the way to the mills making the final product. By the 1930s, Alcoa stood completely alone. But when you have that kind of absolute dominance, well, you become a pretty big target. The federal government decided enough was enough, and a legal battle of truly epic proportions was about to kick off. The first real shot was fired back in 1937. The Department of Justice launched this massive antitrust lawsuit aimed at tearing down the corporate giant. And this wasn't just some lawsuit over business practices, it was a direct attack on Alcoa's very existence. The scale of the government's case was just, wow, over 140 specific charges. They weren't just accused of being a monopoly, they were accused of conspiring with foreign companies to keep imports out, and even using illegal tactics like price squeezing, where they'd sell raw materials to potential competitors at super high prices while selling their own finished goods for less. It made it totally impossible for anyone else to even survive. After years and years of litigation, a process that actually got delayed by World War II, the case finally reached its climax. It all came down to one judge and one groundbreaking decision that would literally rewrite American corporate law forever. Now here's a wild little detail. The case couldn't be heard by the Supreme Court because most of the justices had a conflict of interest. So the final appeal landed in a special session of the Court of Appeals, led by the legendary Judge Learned Hand. And his take on antitrust law, well, it was going to set a brand new precedent for decades to come. And this is the heart of it all. Judge Hand argued that the mere possession of the power to control price and curb competition was inherently monopolistic and illegal. This was absolutely revolutionary. Before this, you basically had to prove a company abused its power. Hand came along and said, no, just having that much power is in itself against the law. See, Alcoa's whole defense was, hey, we got here honestly. We're just better and more efficient than everyone else. But Judge Hand's ruling just swept that whole argument aside. He basically said, it doesn't matter how you built the monopoly. What matters is that the monopoly exists. The power itself was the crime. This completely changed the rules of the game for big business in America. Okay, so a legal victory is one thing, but how do you actually break up a real-world monopoly that controls literally every part of an industry? The government's solution was frankly ingenious, and it came from a totally unexpected place: the end of World War II. Think about it. To build all those airplanes needed to win the war, the US government had financed and built tons of state-of-the-art aluminum plants. When the war was over, all these huge advanced factories were just sitting there. The government saw a golden opportunity. So they came up with this brilliant 3-step plan to basically engineer competition out of thin air. Step 1, identify all these surplus, government-owned plants. Step 2, sell or lease them on incredibly sweet terms to companies that wanted to compete. And step 3, this was the real killer blow, they forced Alcoa to license its most valuable secret technology to these new rivals for free, no royalties. And who were the lucky winners? 2 main companies, Reynolds Metals and Kaiser Aluminum. With the government's help, Reynolds got its hands on the world's largest alumina plant, and Kaiser took over crucial smelters. These companies went from being nobodies to industry giants almost overnight. And to top it all off, Alcoa's own Canadian division, Alcan, was forced to spin off into its own separate company. So with the legal precedent set and powerful new competitors literally built by the government, the final outcome was pretty much a done deal. The 50-year reign of Alcoa was officially over. In a final verdict in 1950, the court decided that Alcoa didn't actually need to be broken up into a bunch of smaller companies. And why not? Because the government's plan had already worked. With Reynolds and Kaiser now in the game, the problem had basically solved itself. The company survived, but its absolute chokehold on the American market was gone for good. And if you want proof, just look at the numbers. They're staggering. In 1940, Alcoa had about 90% of the market. Just 15 years later, by 1955, its share had plummeted to around a third. Those new government-backed players, they now controlled the other 2/3. The monopoly was officially and decisively broken.
Now, a lot of you have probably heard the story of Alcoa, the American company that had a death grip on the aluminum market for decades. This explainer starts after that monopoly was finally broken up, because what replaced it, well, it was a whole different kind of animal. Just as powerful, but way more complex.
Okay, so let's set the scene. After World War II, the aluminum industry completely transformed. It went from one company calling all the shots to a small, tight-knit club of multinational corporations basically running the show together.
And here they are. Meet the 6 majors. These giants from the US, Canada, France, and Switzerland were what you call vertically integrated. That's just a fancy way of saying they owned everything, from the dirt in the ground to the shiny, finished metal. They were the new kings.
And this chart right here, it tells you everything you need to know about their power. By 1960, these 6 companies controlled a staggering 75% of the entire free world's aluminum market. It wasn't a monopoly anymore, no. It was an oligopoly, a very exclusive and very coordinated club. And man, was this new setup profitable. The 1950s were a boom time, fueled by the Korean War and intense competition between these giants. It led to this explosion of innovation. Over 2,000 new civilian uses for aluminum were discovered. Consumption doubled. Business was great. But this whole boom was built on a very specific global system, one with a deep hidden inequality right at its core.
The whole global enterprise basically hinged on a simple 2-step process, turning a reddish rock from the tropics into the shiny metal we all know and use. And if you can understand that physical journey, you can understand the entire power struggle that came next.
So here's how it works. It's a 2-stage process. First, you take the raw bauxite ore, the rock you dig out of the ground, and refine it into a fine white powder called alumina. Then, you take that alumina and you smelt it. You basically zap it with huge, and I mean huge, amounts of electricity to create pure aluminum. That second step is the crucial part. It needs an insane amount of cheap, continuous power.
And because of that crazy hunger for cheap electricity, a stark geographic divide was created. The raw bauxite, that was all dug up in tropical nations in the global south, places like Jamaica and Guinea. But the profitable part, the energy-guzzling smelting, that happened almost exclusively in the industrialized global north. The US, Canada, Europe, and Japan. The real money was made thousands of miles away from the mines.
You can see the problem here, right? This created this deep structural inequality. The nations that actually had the resources saw almost none of the final profit. And the reason for that came down to a very clever bit of corporate accounting.
It's a mechanism called transfer pricing. Now, since the 6 majors own the entire supply chain, they were essentially selling the bauxite from one of their own internal divisions to another. So they got to set the price themselves. And surprise, surprise, they set that price artificially low. This meant they paid next to nothing in taxes to the countries where the mining actually happened, and they could book all their profits back home where taxes were lower.
This was the big problem for all the bauxite-producing countries. Their main source of income was being totally manipulated. I mean, how do you get your fair share when the very price you're trying to tax is basically a phantom, just an internal number made up in a corporate boardroom? Well, in the early 1970s, they found an answer. The bauxite nations realized their real power wasn't in trying to negotiate one-on-one. It was in uniting. They decided to form a cartel.
And they took a page directly from the playbook of the oil-producing nations. They saw the huge geopolitical success of OPEC and understood that if they coordinated their policies, they could finally create a real counterweight to the immense power of the six majors.
And so, in 1974, the International Bauxite Association, or the IBA, was born. Its mission was simple, direct, and powerful. Work together to drastically increase the money they received from their own natural resources. And it was one of the IBA's key members, Jamaica, that led the charge with a move that was as simple as it was revolutionary. Honestly, it completely changed the game.
This was the masterstroke. Jamaica's government realized it was just pointless to argue over the fake transfer price of the raw bauxite ore. So instead, they decided to tie their new tax levy directly to the real, publicly traded market price of the finished aluminum ingot.
What I love about this is how clearly it shows the genius of the plan. Control just shifted completely. Instead of a price controlled by corporations in a back room, the tax was now based on the final market price, which was transparent and totally out of their hands. There was nowhere to hide.
Okay, to really understand the impact, look at this number. In 1973, under the old system of transfer pricing, Jamaica's total revenue from its massive bauxite industry was just $25 million.
And 1 year later, in 1974, after they rolled out this new levy, that number jumped to an estimated $150 million. That's a six-fold increase, almost overnight.
This move sent absolute shockwaves through the industry. The aluminum giants were forced to absorb these huge new costs. And of course, other countries were watching. Recognizing how well it worked, other IBA members in the Caribbean and Africa quickly followed Jamaica's lead, rolling out similar taxes and sparking this incredible wave of economic nationalism.
Let's talk about aluminum. Its economic story is absolutely wild. We're going to dig into how it went from being this stable industrial powerhouse to a super volatile asset traded on global markets. It's quite a ride.
So to really get our heads around this, let's start with a crazy number. At its absolute peak, the US aluminum industry was using enough electricity to power 3 cities the size of modern-day Seattle, continuously. Just think about that scale of energy consumption for a minute.
And that, of course, leads us to the big central question of this whole story. What on earth happens when your entire industry is built on cheap power, and then suddenly, that power isn't cheap anymore? To get to the answer, we've got to go back to aluminum's golden age. It was a time built on what was really a perfect marriage between this metal and cheap, abundant electricity.
Here's the thing you have to understand about making aluminum. It doesn't just need a ton of electricity, it needs that electricity flowing 24/7 without any interruption. And that one simple requirement shaped the entire geography of the industry.
So, naturally, the industry flocked to the Pacific Northwest, right to the Columbia River Basin. They became the first big customer for the massive new dams like Bonneville and Grand Coulee. You see, it was this perfect symbiotic relationship. The dams got a customer for their huge output of cheap, constant power. And in return, the industry built 10 enormous smelters, employing about 11,000 people. For decades, this whole system was stable, predictable, and incredibly powerful.
But you know how these things go. That stability was resting on a pretty fragile foundation, and it was about to get completely shattered by the first major crisis, the great energy shock of the 1970s. When geopolitical conflicts sent oil and gas prices through the roof, the cost of just making electricity skyrocketed everywhere. And for an industry as thirsty for power as aluminum, well, it was nothing short of a catastrophe. The one core assumption the entire industry was built on, that energy would always be cheap and endless, was just gone. It exposed this massive vulnerability they had. Smelters that weren't lucky enough to be locked into long-term hydropower contracts, well, they became unprofitable almost overnight. The weakest ones just had to shut their doors for good. And if you think that was bad, well, that was just punch number 1. The second blow came when the big aluminum producers lost their iron grip on the price of the metal itself. See, for decades, they controlled everything through what was called the producer list price. You could almost call it a cartel, really. The major companies would just coordinate with each other to cut production when demand was low. They were artificially managing supply to keep prices stable and, protect themselves from all that messy market chaos.
The industry was completely used to this world of stability, control, and predictability.
but it was about to be shoved, violently, into a brand new reality. One that was volatile, totally unpredictable, and driven by global forces way outside their control.
So what broke the system? Well, it was getting squeezed from two sides. Regulators in Europe looked at this producer system and basically said, that's an illegal cartel, and they fought to break it up. At the exact same time, the energy crisis was causing a lot of infighting within the group itself.
And then came the moment that changed everything. October 1978, the London Metal Exchange, or LME, introduced a futures contract for aluminum. Now that might sound a little dry, but what it did was create a transparent, open market for the metal. The big producers knew this would totally destroy their ability to set prices. They fought it like crazy, but they failed.
And that failure plunged the entire industry headfirst into a completely new and unpredictable financial world.
The effect wasn't gradual. It was immediate and it was dramatic. The shift to an open market on the LME resulted in, and I'm quoting here, instantly doubling the volatility of the metal.
And you can see that chaos right here. Look at the difference. The price swings in this new era were literally twice as big as they were back in the good old days of the producer system. The predictability they had built everything on, gone, forever. And this right here is the fundamental transformation we've been talking about. Aluminum stopped being just an industrial material that you used to build things. It became a highly financialized asset, a lot like a stock or a bond. Its price was now being jerked around not just by manufacturers, but by global supply, demand, and a whole lot of financial speculation.
So, to survive all this, the industry had to completely change its game plan. It really boiled down to two key things. First, they had to find new financial tools to try and manage this insane new price volatility. And second, they had to get really serious about recycling to cut down on how much they depended on that super energy-hungry primary production.
I mean, have you ever really stopped and looked at one? It feels so simple, right? So disposable, but the journey to get this perfectly engineered little object into your hand was this decades-long battle of innovation, marketing, and pure, relentless obsession.
Because this isn't just a container. It's really a trophy from a ruthless war for your business. It's a tiny marvel of precision engineering. And, maybe most importantly, it was the accidental spark for a global environmental revolution.
Now, to really get why the aluminum can was such a game changer, we have to go back in time. Back to the 1950s, to an age where getting a drink from a can was, well, it was kind of a hassle.
Just look at the difference. The old steel cans from the 50s, they were heavy, they would actually rust. You needed a special tool, a church key, just to puncture a hole in the top. They often left this nasty metallic taste in your drink, and as you can imagine, they created a massive litter problem. And for the longest time, the steel industry just wasn't very interested in fixing any of it.
And this is where our story gets a hero. One man decided that the steel can was basically an insult to his product, and he was absolutely determined to do something about it. His name was Bill Coors.
For Bill Coors, this was personal. He saw that steel can as a direct threat to the quality of his beer, and he was genuinely bothered by the environmental mess it was making. So he launched what you can only describe as an obsessive quest to create something better.
And look, this was not a cheap obsession. Coors invested $10 million, which was a massive, massive sum back then, into just relentless trial and error. You have to understand, plenty of people had tried and failed to make an aluminum can, but he was just determined to succeed.
And on January 22nd, 1959, he did it. The world's first ever two-piece, recyclable aluminum beer can hit the market, and people loved it instantly. It chilled way, way faster than steel or glass, and thanks to this new polymer coating on the inside, it flawlessly preserved the taste of the beer. The revolution had officially begun.
But there was still one problem. One big hurdle holding the aluminum can back from total world domination. It was a huge step forward, sure, but you still needed that darn tool to open it.
The problem was simple. How do you get rid of the can opener for good? And the answer, funny enough, didn't come from some giant corporation. It came from one frustrated guy at a picnic.
This is Ermel Frazi. The story goes that he was at a family picnic, realized he'd forgotten his can opener, and actually had to use his car bunker to pry open a beer. He was so annoyed by this, so completely fed up, that he dedicated himself to inventing an integrated, self-opening can.
And Frazi's solution was just genius in its simplicity.
See, he realized that aluminum, unlike brittle steel, was malleable. You could work with it. So he pre-scored the lid, attached a pull tab with this tiny little rivet that acted as a lever, and created the pop top. A simple pull was all it took to break the seal. It was perfect.
So, how much did people love it? Well, when Iron City Beer adopted the pop top, their sales shot up by a staggering 400%. That is not a typo, 400%. After that, it was game over. Everyone, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they all had to switch.
But this created a brand new problem. Billions of these sharp, discarded pull tabs littering beaches and parks. So, the design evolved one last time. By 1976, the industry had perfected the non-detaching stay-on tab that we all know today, finally completing the can's modern form.
Okay, so the can is super convenient. We get it. But to truly conquer the world, it also had to be cheap to make, like billions of them cheap. And this required one final manufacturing breakthrough that is, frankly, mind-blowing.
It's called the drawn and ironed process, or D&I for short. Now, instead of welding 3 pieces of metal together like an old steel can, the D&I process magically forms the entire can body from a single, seamless piece of aluminum. This completely eliminated the side seam, which was always the weakest point of the old can.
The process itself is just incredible to watch. First, a press stamps flat aluminum sheets into these shallow little cups. Then comes the magic. A punch forces that cup through a series of rings, literally ironing the walls and stretching them super thin and tall. Finally, the base is shaped into a dome for strength, the top is trimmed, and it's ready for a lid.
And here is the truly amazing part. That ironing process thins the can's walls to roughly 1/3 of their original thickness. This single feat of engineering saves a massive amount of material and cost, and it's what makes it possible to produce billions and billions of these cans so affordably.
So the can had conquered the market. It was lightweight, convenient, and cheap. But its biggest impact, its most lasting legacy on the world, was something that nobody had ever planned for. It was a complete and total accident.
So what was this massive, world-changing unintended consequence? It was the creation of the entire modern, closed-loop recycling economy as we know it today. Seriously.
And the reason really just boils down to simple economics. Making new aluminum from raw ore is incredibly energy intensive. But recycling it, that uses only about 5% of that energy. So when energy prices soared back in the 70s, that 95% saving wasn't just good for the planet, it suddenly became an economic necessity. So the industry built the infrastructure to make it happen. Coors, once again leading the way, launched a Cash for Cans program way back in 1970. Soon thousands of buyback centers sprang up all over the country, and by the late 80s, we were recovering millions of tons of aluminum every single year. Today, that system is so incredibly efficient that a can you put in your recycling bin can be melted down, reformed, refilled with a new drink, and placed right back on a grocery store shelf in less than 30 days. It's the most recycled consumer product in the entire world.
The same stuff that makes your soda cans. It's kind of wild to think about, but right around the same time aluminum was taking over the world of packaging, it was also pulling off an even bigger job. It was literally giving our modern cities their sleek, shiny face. Okay, so how did it do it? To get that, we need to think about the #1 challenge architects had as they were trying to build taller and taller skyscrapers. It all came down to one thing: weight. And this is where aluminum stepped in and became a total game changer. See, for most of history, a building's walls had to do all the heavy lifting. They supported the entire structure's weight. So you ended up with these incredibly thick, heavy stone walls, which meant you could only build so high before the bottom just couldn't take it anymore. But then this brilliant idea came along. What if the wall wasn't the structure? What if it was just a light skin, like a jacket, hanging off an internal steel skeleton? That idea was called the curtain wall. And this right here is the key. A curtain wall is basically a building's fancy raincoat. It doesn't hold anything up. It just keeps the weather out. And after World War II, technology got so good that we could shape or extrude aluminum into these really complex, super strong, and incredibly precise shapes. It was light, it was strong, it wouldn't rust. It was the absolute perfect material for these new high-rise skins.
And the system itself is it's so beautifully simple. You start with these vertical aluminum beams, they're called mullions, that create a grid. Then you connect those with horizontal rails to complete the frame, and finally you just fill in the gaps with either big panes of glass or solid panels. That's it. It's this elegant, highly engineered Rego system for giants.
But here's the thing, having a great invention isn't always enough. You've got to get people to actually use it. And the old school construction world was, let's say, a little skeptical. So companies like Alcoa had to get creative. And boy, did they ever. They launched one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns you've ever seen. Alcoa didn't just sell metal, they sold a vision of the future. First, in 1953, they built their own skyscraper headquarters as a massive, shimmering advertisement. Then, they kicked off something called the Forecast Program, which was pure marketing gold, designed to show everyone how aluminum was going to build the world of tomorrow. And how did they do it? They hired the biggest rock stars of mid-century design. We're talking absolute legends like Osamu Noguchi and the dream team Charles and Ray Eames. By getting these design icons on board, Alcoa completely changed how people saw their product. Suddenly, aluminum wasn't just some boring industrial material. No, it was high art. It was cool. It was the material of the optimistic space-age future. And this powerful mix of amazing engineering and incredible design was about to make aluminum the signature look of an entire architectural era. I mean, you just couldn't argue with the results. You had architects like the great Mies van der Rohe creating these sleek, geometric masterpieces that every corporation suddenly wanted. And that whole look, that clean, modern, international style, was only possible because of the aluminum curtain wall. It wasn't just a part of the building anymore. Aluminum was the look of modernism. And if you want to see the absolute peak of this idea, the ultimate example of aluminum's reign over architecture, you just have to look at the original World Trade Center in New York City. The lead architect, Minoru Yamasaki, had this breathtaking vision. 2 identical towers, each soaring 110 stories into the sky. He used a new kind of tube-like structure, and famously, he designed them with very narrow windows. It wasn't just for looks. It was a clever way to make people inside feel safe and secure at those dizzying heights. And the skin of these towers, wow. The entire exterior was wrapped in this gleaming facade of a special aluminum alloy, creating these perfect vertical pinstripes that shot towards the sky. Not only did it look absolutely stunning, but it was so tough it protected the building from everything and needed practically zero maintenance. It was the perfect expression of the tower's incredible height. So yeah, the World Trade Center really became the ultimate monument to what aluminum could do. Its incredible strength, its lightweight, and its power to totally reshape our world. So, the next time you're walking through a city and you see one of those sleek, modern skyscrapers, maybe you'll think of this. The same humble material that holds your soda became the very skin of our modern world. From something you can crush in your hand to something that touches the clouds, aluminum literally gave the 20th century city its face. How a series of 20th century crises took it from a super expensive luxury to the absolute foundation of our technology. You have to remember, for most of modern history, the world ran on steel and cast iron. They were the big dogs on the block. Why? Well, they were heavy, they were strong, but most importantly, they were cheap. In post-war America, with gas costing next to nothing and highways stretching out forever, why would you even think about changing? Aluminum, on the other hand, was this lightweight, exotic, and really expensive material, something you'd maybe find in a fancy European sports car. It was a cool idea, but definitely not a necessity. So what happened? What could possibly dethrone the king of all metals, good old cheap and abundant steel? Well, the answer wasn't some single genius invention. It was a global shockwave that forced an entire industry to tear up its playbook and start from scratch. And that whole revolution, it didn't start in some high-tech lab or an aircraft hangar like you might think. Nope, it started right there on the road. All because of a crisis that brought the global economy to its knees and put Detroit under unbelievable pressure. What's so wild is just how fast this all went down. I mean, in the 60s, gas was cheap and American cars were basically beautiful land yacht tanks. Then, boom, 1973 hits. The oil embargo quadruples fuel prices overnight. Just 2 years later, the US government steps in with super strict fuel economy standards. All of a sudden, efficiency wasn't just a nice feature to have, it was the law. For the car companies, the path forward was crystal clear. There was really only one immediate answer: make the cars lighter. Every single pound, every single kilogram they could shave off meant better gas mileage. And this desperate hunt for a lighter solution brought them right back to that metal they'd ignored for so long: aluminum. Okay, so to really get the impact here, let's just look at the raw numbers. Picture a typical heavy car part made of steel or cast iron, like a piece of an engine block. Let's say it weighs about 2 kilograms. Now here's the magic. An aluminum replacement, engineered to have the exact same strength, weighs only 1 kilogram. You could literally swap out 2 kilograms of steel with just 1 kilogram of aluminum. For the engineers scrambling to meet those new fuel standards, this ratio was an absolute game changer. It was the magic bullet they'd been looking for. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Aluminum went from a luxury item to an absolute necessity. Automakers started swapping out everything: massive iron engine blocks, heavy transmission casings, suspension parts. And this didn't just save gas. By dramatically cutting the weight over the front wheels, it made the car's handles so much better and, believe it or not, a whole lot safer. Okay, so that's the story on the road. But this huge shift in the car industry didn't happen in a vacuum. It was actually built on some hard-won lessons that were learned on the Cold War battlefield, where, let's be honest, the stakes were even higher. The big problem for the US military was a classic catch-22. How do you keep your troops safe with heavy armor, but also stay light enough to move them anywhere in the world, like right now? They needed a vehicle that could be flown in, dropped off, and handle any terrain. And heavy steel armor just wasn't going to cut it. And the answer they came up with? The M113 Armored Personnel Carrier. This thing, adapted way back in 1960, was truly revolutionary. It was the very first military vehicle ever to have a hull made completely out of aluminum armor. And during the Vietnam War, the M113 was an absolute superstar. Its 5083 aircraft-grade alloy was tough enough to stop small arms fire and shrapnel, but the whole vehicle was so light it could be airlifted by helicopter and could just plow right through dense jungle. So here's the crucial takeaway. The M113 proved without a doubt that aluminum could provide the same life-saving protection as steel, but at a fraction of the weight. But as demanding as the battlefield was, the toughest test for aluminum was still to come. As we move from the ground up into the air, the challenges just got exponentially bigger, pushing metallurgists to their absolute limits during the Cold War. I mean, sure, early planes used aluminum, but the jet age, that was a whole different beast. It introduced these brutal, new, destructive forces. Jetliners were flying higher and faster, which meant the fuselage was constantly being pressurized and depressurized again and again. This created the terrifying threat of metal fatigue. Then you've got supersonic speeds, which bring insane friction and aerodynamic loads that older metals just couldn't handle. They'd literally tear themselves apart. So to solve this puzzle, scientists basically created a whole new family of high-performance aluminum alloys. Think of it like a specialized toolkit with a different alloy for every single job. The 2000 series alloys, like 2024, were perfected for fatigue resistance, which is why they became the go-to for the skin of jets like the Boeing 747. But for critical parts where you needed just raw, absolute strength, like the internal frame of the supersonic Concorde, they turned to the super strong 7000 series. This relentless evolution, this constant push for stronger, lighter metals, it all reached its absolute peak in the most hostile, unforgiving environment you can possibly imagine: the vacuum of space. The space race was, quite literally, forged in aluminum. You see, for space exploration, the rules are simple and non-negotiable. You need the most strength you can get for the least amount of weight, and there is zero room for failure, especially under insane temperature swings. And it all started back in 1957 with Sputnik 1. That iconic little sphere made from a highly polished aluminum alloy. But the real monster in the closet for rocket scientists was something called cryogenic temperatures. We're talking about the mind-numbing, insane cold of the liquid oxygen and hydrogen fuel that powered giants like the Saturn V rocket. And right here, this is why aluminum became the only choice. At those temperatures, regular old carbon steel becomes incredibly brittle. It would catastrophically shatter under the immense pressures of a rocket launch. But aluminum alloys, they do something amazing. They actually hold on to their strength and flexibility. So for the massive fuel tanks of the Saturn V, it wasn't just the best material for the job, it was the only material that could do it. So when you pull back and look at the whole story, you can see how all these different pressures, from the highway to the battlefield to the stratosphere and beyond, they all work together to push aluminum alloys to their modern potential, and in doing so, completely reshaped our world. It really was a journey that was defined by 4 great trials: The energy crisis demanded efficiency. The Cold War battlefield demanded mobile armor. The jet age demanded incredible resistance to fatigue. And the space race demanded nothing less than flawless performance at the very edge of what was possible. And there's a quote from the source material that just sums this all up so perfectly. It says, "The mastery of aluminum metallurgy achieved by the aerospace industry effectively removed the material limitations on human exploration." Think about that. Aluminum didn't just help us build cool new things. It allowed us to go places we physically could not have gone before.
Geopolitical power struggles, market meltdowns, and now a technological revolution. Its story has quietly shaped the last 3 decades of global trade, and right now, it's at the absolute center of the race for a green economy. Okay, so let's set the stage. Our story really kicks off in an era of absolute, undisputed American industrial power. For most of the 20th century, when it came to aluminum, the United States wasn't just a player in the game, it was the game, the undisputed titan.
And the scale of this dominance is just staggering. Check this out. Back in 1980, the US was churning out over 4.65 million tons of primary aluminum. To put that in perspective, that's a full 1/3 of the entire world's output. The global market literally moved to the rhythm of American smelters.
But then, a geopolitical earthquake hit, and everything, and I mean everything, changed. You see, the end of the Cold War wasn't just about politics. It sent this massive shockwave, tearing through the global commodities market.
Just look at these numbers. It's insane. The Soviet Union had this enormous kind of secret aluminum industry that was basically built to feed its war machine. When the USSR collapsed, poof, that military demand just vanished overnight. All of a sudden, you have these Russian smelters, desperate for hard cash, and they just unleash this flood of metal onto the world. We're talking exports exploding from around 200,000 tons to over 2 million tons in just 5 years. Unbelievable.
The market just couldn't handle it. There's no way it could absorb that much metal that fast. It's a textbook case of supply totally overwhelming demand, right? It created this huge glut, and prices in the London Metal Exchange just went into a nosedive. The old way of doing things? Yeah, that was officially over.
And while the West was still trying to figure out what just happened, a new giant was waking up. China didn't just see an opening, it saw a chance to completely take over.
This chart tells one of the wildest stories in modern industrial history. While US production just cratered, China's went completely vertical. Back in 2000, they were number 2. Today, they produce a mind-bending 43 million tons. And make no mistake, this was never just about aluminum. This was about controlling the building blocks of the entire 21st century economy.
Just let that sink in for a second. Today, one country, China, is responsible for 60% of all the new aluminum made on the entire planet. This didn't just happen. This was by design.
So how on earth did they do it? Well, it wasn't some free market miracle. Nope. This was a state-sponsored industrial plan on an almost unimaginable scale. We're talking an estimated $70 billion in subsidies in just 5 years. Add to that super cheap capital and electricity, advanced tech, basically handed to them from state universities, and the power to greenlight and build massive factories in less than a year.
Now, a shift this big doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's sent these massive ripple effects, economically, politically, and even ethically, all across the globe.
So for the US, this led to a total hollowing out of its primary smelting industry. And when we say primary smelting, we mean those huge plants that make aluminum from scratch. It just became impossible to compete with China's subsidized prices. And on top of that, you had domestic energy policies that sometimes made it more profitable for companies to just sell their power back to the grid instead of actually making metal. So, one by one, the American smelters shut their doors. Today, US production is less than 1% of the world's total.
And then there's the human cost, which we have to talk about. There are reports from the US government that point to a really dark side of this expansion. They cite strong evidence that parts of China's aluminum supply chain are intertwined with state-sponsored forced labor programs, particularly involving ethnic minorities in the Xinjiang region.
Okay, so the world has started to push back. The US put up tariffs to try and level the playing field for its own industry. China itself actually put a cap on its production, mostly because of major environmental concerns. And now you see big Western companies under a ton of pressure to audit their supply chains and make sure their aluminum is sourced ethically.
But, and this is a really important but, that's not the whole story for the US industry. While that primary smelting part was in a free fall, the rest of the industry got creative. It adapted. The downstream parts of the business, everything from turning aluminum into cans and car parts to recycling, they actually started to boom. So even with the collapse in primary production, the US aluminum industry as a whole still supports almost 700,000 jobs. It's a pretty amazing story of resilience.
Which brings us to the final chapter of our story. And this is the part that's being written right now. The entire industry is staring down its next huge challenge, which is also its next huge opportunity: decarbonization.
See, here's the deal. Making aluminum takes a ton of energy. The process they've been using since the 1880s, it pumps out massive amounts of carbon dioxide. We're talking about an industry that's responsible for roughly 3% of all direct industrial greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. That's a huge number.
But a major breakthrough is happening. It's called inert anode technology. It was developed by a joint venture called Alesis. And get this, it's backed by heavy hitters like Alcoa, Rio Tinto, and even Apple. And this tech, it completely rewrites the basic chemistry of how you make aluminum.
Okay, this right here shows you just how revolutionary this is. The old way, you burn these big carbon blocks, and you get aluminum plus a bunch of CO2. The new way, with the Alesis process, you use a special, durable material that isn't carbon. And the only thing that comes out besides the aluminum is pure oxygen. Yeah, oxygen.
So to be crystal clear, this isn't just a small improvement. This is a total reinvention of the entire process. It's the first fundamental change to how aluminum is made in over 130 years.
And here's where it gets really exciting. When you pair this new technology with renewable energy like hydropower, you get the holy grail. Brand new, primary aluminum with a zero carbon footprint. This is way more than just a win for the environment. It's the next great economic and geopolitical prize. Whoever masters this process first, they're going to lead the industry for the next 100 years.
That sleek, cool metal device you're probably holding right now, or that's sitting on your desk, well, it has a pretty wild story. It's the story of how one material, aluminum, went from being kind of boring and functional to defining the entire look and feel of modern tech.
I mean, just look at this. It's kind of crazy when you really stop and think about it. How did we get from those clunky, beige plastic boxes we all had in the past to these premium, beautifully engineered metal devices we carry with us everywhere today? Well, it took a complete revolution in how we think about design and manufacturing.
So, let's rewind a bit. For a long, long time, consumer tech basically lived in what you could call the age of plastic. And for good reason. It was cheap, it was super easy to mold into any shape you wanted, and hey, it got the job done. Aluminum was for, soda cans, not high-end gadgets.
Now, when aluminum was used in tech, it was always hidden away, strictly behind the scenes. Its job was purely functional. It was great for things like heat sinks, pulling warmth away from the processors, and for internal braces that added strength without a lot of weight. You were never ever supposed to actually see it.
But that all changed when one company decided to place a massive bet on metal. They looked at aluminum and saw something more than just an internal component. They saw it as the entire product itself. And this, right here, was the start of the unibody revolution.
So, what exactly is unibody? Well, it was this game-changing idea that Apple brought to the mainstream back in 2008. The old way was to screw together a whole jigsaw puzzle of flimsy plastic parts. The unibody way? You take a single, solid block of aluminum and you carve the device right out of it. The case is the structure, and that was the key that let them make devices that were thinner and way stronger, all at the same time.
And the process itself was basically lifted from the aerospace industry. You'd start with a thick slab of raw aluminum, and then these incredibly precise machines would just carve away everything that wasn't the device. We're talking every little detail. The keyboard area, the holes for the ports, exactly where the motherboard would sit. It meant no wasted space, no bulky internal frames. Just a device that was sleeker, lighter, and so much more rigid than anything before it.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. To actually pull this off for a product sold to millions of people, Apple basically had to corner the market on these advanced milling machines. They reportedly bought 10,000 of them. 10,000. It was an absolutely massive industrial move.
But you know how it goes. This relentless push to make devices thinner and thinner and thinner, well, it eventually exposed a critical weakness. The very material that had come to define this new premium standard was about to cause a huge crisis.
And that crisis had a name you probably remember: Bendgate. This was back in 2014. The brand new, incredibly thin iPhone 6 Plus started warping in people's pockets.
It was a total PR nightmare, and it threatened to undo all that premium credibility that aluminum had built up.
So they had a huge problem, and they needed a fix, like yesterday. The issue was the type of aluminum they were using, a 6000 series alloy. It's great because it's easy to shape, but it's also relatively soft. The solution was a big pivot to a 7000 series alloy for the next model. By adding zinc to the mix, it becomes up to 60% stronger. The only catch? It's harder to machine, and it's tougher to anodize, which is the process that gives it color. But it completely solved the bending problem.
So, after Apple not only survived Bendgate, but proved that people would happily pay a premium for that solid metallic feel, the rest of the industry really had no choice. They had to follow. The age of plastic, at least for high-end tech, was officially over.
It was like a switch flipped. All of a sudden, everyone was scrambling to go metal. Competitors like Samsung, who for years had defended using plastic, did a complete 180 with the aluminum-framed Galaxy S6. Microsoft went all in on that machined metal look for its entire Surface line. That cool to the touch, precise feel of aluminum just became the language of premium tech.
And that brings us to today. The story of aluminum in our gadgets has entered a whole new chapter. And the focus has shifted away from just aesthetics and strength to something even more critical: environmental sustainability. And here is the one number that explains everything. Just 5%. Recycling aluminum takes only 5% of the enormous amount of energy you need to make brand new aluminum from raw ore. That difference is absolutely staggering. And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at that gap. This is why recycling isn't just a nice thing to do, it's a mathematical necessity for any company that's serious about its carbon footprint. Making a device out of recycled aluminum uses a tiny fraction of the energy, and it creates a fraction of the emissions. The savings are huge.
And because of this, you're seeing the major players move really aggressively here. Both Apple and Samsung now say they use 100% recycled aluminum for the cases of many of their biggest products. For them, this is a crucial step if they want to hit those big net zero carbon goals and cut out millions of tons of emissions.
Hey everyone, and welcome. You've seen them everywhere, right? Electric vehicles. But the real revolution, it's not just what you see. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible science that solved the single biggest problem holding EVs back. Okay, let's just jump right in with a single, absolutely staggering number. 3,000 pounds. That's how much a long-range EV battery pack can weigh. Just the battery. And that, my friends, is a colossal physics problem. Yeah, a huge piece of that problem is something called rolling resistance. Basically, all that weight means your car is in a constant fight with the road. The best way to think about it is this. It's like you're perpetually driving up a slight hill, a 1 in 100 gradient to be exact. You're just bleeding energy with every single turn of the wheels.
So this brings us to the core challenge, the one that keeps engineers up at night, the EV weight problem. And for today's automakers, this isn't just some small issue on a checklist. No, this is an existential, relentless war against mass.
And this chart right here, this shows you exactly why they're fighting so hard. It's a direct and really powerful relationship. For every 10% of weight you can shave off a car, you get a 6 to 8% boost in efficiency. And in the EV world, what does that mean? More range. All without having to stuff in a bigger, more expensive battery. So what's their primary weapon in this war on weight? Well, it turns out to be advanced aluminum. But not just because it's light, oh no. It has a powerful secret weapon, something we call the multiplier effect. Okay, this is where things get really, really clever. It's a phenomenon called mass decompounding. Just look at this cascade. When you use aluminum to make the mainframe lighter, boom, you can then use smaller, lighter brakes. And because the brakes are lighter, you can get away with a lighter suspension system. And what follows from that? You can use a smaller, lighter motor to get the exact same performance. It's this incredible chain reaction of saving weight. And we're not talking about a small effect here. This quote from an MIT study just nails it perfectly. For every single pound of primary weight saved, you can yield nearly an additional pound of secondary mass savings. It's like a 2-for-1 deal on getting rid of weight. Absolutely wild. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Isn't aluminum way more expensive than steel? And you'd be right, it is. But here's the kicker, the crucial point. It is actually cheaper for automakers to use that pricey aluminum to cut weight than it is to add more incredibly expensive battery cells to get the same driving range. Lighter is literally more profitable. So, problem solved, right? Use aluminum, make cars lighter, mission accomplished. Well, not quite. See, solving the weight problem created a brand new massive bottleneck on the factory floor, and this led to something we now call the gigacasting revolution. Just look at the difference here. On the left, you've got the old way of building a car's chassis, painstakingly welding and riveting hundreds of individual metal parts together. It's slow, it's complicated. And on the right, gigacasting, making the entire rear or front of the car's underbody as one single massive piece. The impact of this shift is just staggering. Let's just run through the numbers quickfire. First up, 70. A single gigacast replaces over 70 individual components that used to have to be made separately. And by getting rid of all those parts, you also get rid of the need to join them. That means you eliminate over 1,600 robotic welds from the assembly line. Gone. And the bottom line, what does this all mean? This process was a key factor in Tesla's slashing the cost of its Model Y rear assembly by a massive 40%. I mean, the efficiency gains are just completely off the charts. Okay, this sounds like a total game changer, right? Which brings us to a really important question. If this is so much better, why didn't somebody do this decades ago? The answer, it turns out, isn't about bigger machines or fancier robots. No, the answer was hidden at the atomic level, inside the material itself. And that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, the secret in the alloy. So here was the showstopper, the reason it couldn't be done. For decades, the strongest aluminum alloys needed a special heat treatment and then a super fast water quench to give them their strength. But if you tried to do that to a part as gigantic and complex as a car's underbody, the intense thermal shock would cause catastrophic warping. The whole thing would twist out of shape, making it completely useless. The solution? Well, it required a whole new class of material. On the left, you see the old T6 alloys, the ones that needed that big, problematic heat treatment. But over on the right, you see the new T5 Diga alloys. They don't need heat treatment, they have a really low risk of warping, and they get all their strength directly from their precise chemical recipe. And this is that atomic solution. It is metallurgy at its absolute finest. Scientists figured out how to tune the chemistry just perfectly. For instance, by adding just the right pinch of manganese, they can control the iron impurities that sneak in from using recycled scrap. This tiny little addition transforms what would be brittle, weak, needle-like points in the metal into strong, rounded structures. This specially engineered, no-heat-treat alloy, that is the invisible technological linchpin that makes the entire gigacasting revolution possible. So, when you connect all these dots, the physics of weight, the economics of making things lighter, and the deep science of the materials themselves, you get this really clear picture of a lighter, cheaper, faster future for how we make cars. So if there's one thing to take away, it's this. The EV revolution wasn't just one invention. It was a chain reaction, a cascade of innovation. First, engineers tackled the weight problem with aluminum, but that created a manufacturing problem, which was then solved by gigacasting. But gigacasting was only possible because of that final, invisible breakthrough in materials science, a secret hidden deep inside the alloy itself.
It's shaping the future of flight, space, and maybe even the future of our planet.
See, on one hand, you've got the aluminum of everyday life. It's useful, totally familiar. But on the other, you have this other kind of aluminum, a metal that's been forged in the absolute crucible of aerospace engineering. We're talking about a material that has to withstand insane temperatures, incredible stress, and hold together jetliners and rockets for decades. And that is where our story really begins.
For decades, aluminum was just the undisputed king of the skies, no question. But just when it seemed like its reign was going to last forever, a new challenger appeared on the scene. And this wasn't just any challenger. It was a genuine, existential threat to the entire industry.
And that challenger? It was carbon fiber. Suddenly, here was this new material that was lighter, it was stronger, and it promised incredible weight savings. All at once, the entire aerospace world was buzzing that aluminum's time was up. People saw it as old tech, totally destined to be replaced by these fancy new composites. The aluminum industry was officially on the ropes.
But you know what? Instead of just fading away, the industry fought back. Hard. Metallurgists went straight back to the drawing board and basically re-engineered aluminum from the atom up. They were creating a revolutionary new alloy, specifically to go head-to-head with carbon fiber.
So what was their secret weapon? Well, they turned to lithium, the lightest elemental metal there is. And they found that by mixing just a tiny amount of it into an aluminum matrix, they created something completely new. A high-performance metal that could claw its way back to the cutting edge.
And here's the genius part. Lithium didn't just give them one benefit, it gave them two at the same time. First, it made the whole alloy lighter. But second, it also dramatically increased its stiffness, what engineers call its elastic modulus. Now, what does that actually mean? It means you could use thinner, lighter parts that were somehow also stronger and way more resistant to bending. It was a win-win.
Now get this, a tiny sprinkle of lithium, we're talking less than 2.5%, completely transforms the metal's properties. This wasn't some minor tweak, it was an absolute game changer. These new alloys became essential for next-gen aircraft, like the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350. They were even critical for SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, where literally every single gram you save means more payload you can get to orbit.
But you know, alloying wasn't the only trick they had up their sleeve. Another group of engineers took a totally different approach. They started asking, hey, what if instead of just improving the metal, we fused it with something else to get the best of both worlds?
And the result was this wild, hybrid, super material called glare. Yeah, it stands for glass, laminate, aluminum reinforced epoxy. It's basically this incredible sandwich made of alternating paper-thin layers of high-grade aluminum and sheets of glass fiber, all glued together with epoxy. It's not quite metal, and it's not quite composite. It's something new.
Now, glare's secret weapon is how it deals with aluminum's biggest weakness on an airplane: tiny little fatigue cracks. See, in a normal sheet of aluminum, these micro cracks can grow over thousands of flights. But in glare, when a crack starts in one of those aluminum layers, it can't get very far. Because as soon as it tries to spread, bam, it runs right into a layer of super strong glass fiber which just absorbs the stress and stops the crack dead in its tracks.
This gave it just unparalleled resistance to fatigue, which made it the perfect material for the massive upper body of the Airbus A380 Super Jumbo. And it wasn't just stronger, it was lighter, more resistant to fire and corrosion, and, this is a big one, it could be repaired with normal metalworking tools. That was a huge deal, because it avoided the super complex and expensive maintenance you need for pure carbon fiber parts.
So with these incredible new aluminum alloys and these crazy hybrids dominating the most advanced aircraft in the world, you'd think the story kind of ends there, right? That for the most ambitious aerospace project in human history, a rocket to actually colonize Mars, the choice of material would be a no-brainer. Well, get ready for a plot twist you will not see coming.
I mean, think about it. You're building Starship, a fully reusable rocket for going to other planets. You've got to start with the absolute best, lightest, strongest aluminum lithium alloy money can buy, right? What else could you possibly use?
Nope, they chose stainless steel. In a move that sent shockwaves through the entire industry, SpaceX just walked away from advanced aluminum and carbon fiber. They decided to build Starship out of a humble, modified, cold-rolled stainless steel. And the question on everyone's mind was just why?
Well, the answer comes down to three key things. First, how it handles the cold. At the super frigid temperatures you need for liquid fuel, aluminum gets brittle. But stainless steel, and this is totally counterintuitive, actually gets stronger and tougher the colder it gets. Second, re-entry heat. Aluminum has a low melting point. It would need a really heavy heat shield. Steel's much higher melting point meant less shielding was needed, which helped offset its extra weight. And finally, good old-fashioned cost and speed. Advanced alloys are crazy expensive. Raw steel costs about $4 a kilogram, and you can weld it together super fast, right out in an open field. It's just a powerful reminder that in engineering, the best material is always a negotiation between physics, speed, and your budget.
But while steel was getting its moment in the spotlight of space exploration, aluminum's story was pivoting again. This time to a new and maybe even bigger mission, right here on planet Earth, powering the green energy revolution.
Okay, so what does this number mean? 85%. According to a massive study by the World Bank, this is the percentage of a very specific, world-changing industry that is completely, and I mean completely, reliant on aluminum.
That's right. Aluminum makes up a staggering 85% of all the mineral material needed for solar panels. Its unique blend of being easy to shape and super resistant to corrosion makes it the only logical choice for the millions upon millions of miles of solar panel frames that we need to build our global green energy grid.
So, you see, aluminum's journey is just one of incredible adaptation. This is a material that started the modern era facing a total existential crisis, and it has reinvented itself again and again. It's transformed itself from a simple commodity into an absolute cornerstone of our modern world.
You can literally watch the whole journey play out over the decades. Back in the 80s, it's the undisputed king of aerospace. The 90s, carbon fiber shows up and it looks like it's all over. Then in the 2000s, it fights back with these incredible new alloys and hybrids. And now, today, it's becoming the foundational metal for our entire transition to sustainable energy. It's just a story of relentless, brilliant ingenuity.
Aluminum has really gone beyond being just a structural material. As one analyst put it so well, it is the fundamental physical medium through which the sustainable electrified future is actively being forged. I mean, from lighter electric vehicles to gigantic solar farms, our green future is quite literally being built out of aluminum.
So, the next time you see a simple piece of aluminum foil, remember this hidden story of innovation and adaptation that's locked inside. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other everyday materials out there are hiding world-changing secrets just waiting for us to unlock them?